This is a prison, not a neighborhood. I can't take it anymore. My mother's voice cracked through the phone, a mix of anger and exhaustion. Every morning, I wake up wondering what new violation Vanessa is going to slap on me next. I can't even enjoy my own garden without feeling like a criminal in my own home. I gripped my phone tighter, feeling my pulse quicken. My mother, the strongest woman I knew, was breaking under the weight of a petty tyrant with a clipboard. She was outside my house at dawn today, measuring my rose bushes with a damn ruler. And then she just stood there, shaking her head like I had committed some kind of crime. A crime for planting flowers. You tell me, does that sound like a neighborhood, or does that sound like a prison? I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just about HOA violations anymore. This was harassment, control, power. And Vanessa had made one critical mistake. She had pushed too far. I took a deep breath and made a promise. Mom, listen to me, I said, my voice steady, controlled. Vanessa thinks she can bully you. She thinks she can get away with this. She has no idea who she's dealing with. Because this wasn't just a fight over fines or garden gnomes anymore. This was war. I never thought I'd hear those words directed at my own mother. But there she was, standing in her front yard, clutching her gardening gloves, while a woman in a beige power suit sneered at her. This neighborhood has standards, Eleanor, the woman declared, waving a clipboard like a weapon. If you can't keep up, maybe it's time to consider other living arrangements. My blood boiled. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was Vanessa Cartwright, the newly elected HOA president of Maplewood Estates, a woman on a ruthless power trip. It started with the roses. Mom had nurtured them for 30 years, winning garden awards and the admiration of neighbors. But according to Vanessa, they were half an inch too close to the sidewalk, violating some obscure bylaw she had just decided to enforce. Then came the fines. 100 a day for minor infractions. A mailbox that had been fined for decades was suddenly non-compliant. Her cherished wind chimes? Noise pollution. The garden gnome collection? Unsightly clutter. Mom tried to reason with her, but Vanessa wasn't listening. Instead, she stood there, smug and condescending, snapping photos and measuring every inch of the property. I wasn't just furious. I was ready for war. What Vanessa didn't know was that she had just made an enemy out of someone with the resources, intelligence, and determination to bring her entire empire crashing down. I thought it would stop with the roses. Maybe a fine or two, a stern letter, and that would be the end of it. But Vanessa Cartwright wasn't just enforcing rules. She was waging a campaign of terror against my mother, Eleanor, and anyone else who dared to challenge her. The next week, the violations multiplied. Mom's vintage mailbox, installed by my late father decades ago, was suddenly non-regulation and had to be replaced within 48 hours, or she'd be fined $250 per day. The wind chimes she'd used for years to track wind direction for her gardening? Excessive noise pollution. Even her beloved garden gnome collection, which had stood as cheerful sentinels in her yard for decades, was deemed unsightly clutter that needed immediate removal. But the worst part? The way Vanessa conducted her morning inspections. At precisely 7 a.m., she would parade down the street, ruler in one hand, phone in the other, snapping photos and measuring every detail of Mom's property. But she didn't stop at just writing up violations. She made a spectacle of it. She would linger in front of our house longer than any other, shaking her head dramatically, sighing loudly, as if she were personally offended by the sight of my mother's perfectly maintained yard. And the neighbors? They were terrified. No one dared speak up. They'd seen what happened to the Johnson family when they questioned one of Vanessa's fines. Suddenly, their appeals went missing, their fines doubled overnight, and their property became the target of even harsher inspections. Everyone whispered behind closed doors, but when it came to facing Vanessa, silence ruled. At first, I tried to handle it the easy way. Running a successful tech company meant I had the money to pay the fines and make the problems disappear. But with each violation, I realized this wasn't about money. It was about power. Then came the final straw. I landed from a business trip to find my mother in tears. Vanessa had humiliated her publicly, posting photos of our home on the neighborhood Facebook group, calling it an eyesore and claiming it was bringing down property values by 15%. Seeing my mother's pride and joy, the home she'd lived in for 30 years, labeled as a public disgrace. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Vanessa thought she was dealing with just another homeowner too busy to fight back. She had no idea that I wasn't just coming home with a checkbook. I was coming with a plan. What Vanessa didn't know was that while she was playing dictator with her measuring tape, I was finalizing the sale of my company, a sale that would give me the resources to do more than just fight back. I was about to flip the entire script on her. What happens next will shock you. If you think Vanessa's power trip has gone too far, comment #HOA corrupt below. If you want to see what happens next, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this war is just getting started. Vanessa thought she was untouchable. She strutted around Maplewood Estates like a queen, her clipboard and measuring tape her scepter, her HOA bylaws her personal decree. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. After seeing my mother humiliated, her home turned into a public target, I knew I couldn't just sit back and throw money at the problem. This was personal now. I started digging. At first, it was just to understand the HOA rules. What was real? What was Vanessa's personal vendetta? I requested the official HOA handbook, and that's when I noticed something strange. Some of the bylaws she was citing didn't exist in the official documents. Others had been quietly modified, but there were no signatures from the homeowners approving them. That was my first red flag. The second came when I looked into the mandatory landscaping fees Vanessa had been pushing. She had recently sent my mother a quote for $23,000 worth of required improvements, complete with a list of approved contractors. I called a few of them. Their prices were triple the industry standard. Then one of them, off the record, admitted that Vanessa got a cut from every contract she approved. It wasn't just about power, it was about money. I needed proof. So I hired a private investigator. Within a week, he came back with more than I could have imagined. Vanessa wasn't just running Maplewood Estates like her personal kingdom. She had done this before. She had been involved in 3 other HOA boards in nearby communities. Each time, she followed the same pattern. Get elected HOA president. Change the bylaws quietly to grant herself more control. Start issuing fines and mandatory repairs through her preferred contractors. Force elderly homeowners out by making it impossible for them to keep up with the demands. Profit. But it got worse. The investigator found financial records showing over $50,000 had been misappropriated from HOA funds over the last 3 years. Vanessa had labeled them as emergency community improvements. But in reality, there were no improvements, no records of work being done. But there were plenty of records of her flights to Hawaii, expensive dinners, and business meetings at luxury spas. And the final nail in the coffin? We caught her on camera. Security footage from Mom's house showed Vanessa sneaking onto the property at night, moving flower pots and yard decorations just an inch or two over the property line, only to photograph them the next morning as violations. She was creating problems just so she could find people for them. This wasn't just HOA abuse anymore. This was fraud. And Vanessa had no idea that I was about to burn her empire to the ground. Vanessa had spent years building her iron grip over Maplewood Estates, convinced that no one would ever dare challenge her. She had buried her secrets under layers of fake bylaws, shady financial dealings, and a climate of fear that kept everyone too scared to resist. But fear was a weapon that only worked if no one fought back. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to annihilate her entire operation. Armed with bank records, security footage, and sworn statements from contractors she had extorted, I assembled a case so airtight that even the most corrupt HOA board wouldn't be able to ignore it. I also called in some legal reinforcements, a top-tier real estate lawyer named Sarah Donovan, an old college friend with a reputation for taking down HOA tyrants. She took one look at the evidence and smirked. "She's done," Sarah said, "but let's make sure she never does this again." The first step? Cutting off her power at the source. I spent the next few days speaking with the neighbors, showing them the truth. At first, many were hesitant, terrified of retaliation. But as I laid out the proof, the stolen funds, the fraudulent fines, the kickback scheme with contractors, the fear began to shift into something else. Rage. Even those who had once sided with Vanessa, believing she was protecting property values, now saw her for what she truly was. A con artist exploiting the very people she claimed to be helping. Then came the final move. I bought 4 properties in the neighborhood, just enough voting power to call a special HOA election and strip Vanessa of her presidency. I also submitted an official request for an independent audit of all HOA finances for the last 5 years. That alone sent Vanessa into a panic. She started desperately fighting back, sending out fear-mongering emails, warning the community that if I took over, property values would plummet. She spread lies that I was trying to destroy Maplewood Estates and even accused me of tampering with the HOA documents, a laughable attempt to gaslight people who had seen the evidence with their own eyes. Then she made a fatal mistake. On the eve of the emergency HOA meeting, she showed up at my mother's house one last time. This time, she didn't bother with her fake smiles and phony politeness. "I don't care who you think you are," she hissed, standing in the driveway, hands clenched into fists. "You're not taking this from me." But she didn't realize she had already lost, because inside, watching through the window, was Sarah. And standing just out of sight, a private investigator, recording every word. Vanessa had played this game for years, but she had finally met someone who wasn't afraid to play back. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. sharp, and by the time I arrived at the Maplewood Estates Community Hall, the place was packed. Normally, these meetings were sleepy, bureaucratic affairs, but tonight, it was a battlefield. I spotted Vanessa at the front, seated at the president's table, her lips pursed, her fingers gripping a stack of neatly printed HOA documents as if they were some kind of shield. Around her, her loyalists, a handful of board members she had bullied or bribed into obedience, sat stiffly, clearly uneasy. They knew what was coming, but no one wanted to be the first to jump ship. The meeting started with Vanessa's usual theatrics. She droned on about preserving community standards and the importance of strong leadership, carefully ignoring the growing tension in the room. But the second she tried to move the agenda forward, I stood up. "Actually," I said, voice loud and clear, "before we discuss new regulations, I think we need to address some serious financial discrepancies." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's eyes snapped to mine, her confident smirk faltering just a fraction. "What are you implying?" she asked coolly. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a thick folder and handed it to Sarah Donovan, my real estate lawyer. She flipped it open, revealing a neatly compiled financial report, the result of weeks of digging. Page after page of unauthorized transactions. HOA funds funneled into Vanessa's personal account. Kickbacks from contractors charging homeowners triple. I let the silence stretch, watching as neighbors leaned in, eyes widening as they skimmed the documents. Then I hit them with the real bombshell. "We also have security footage," I continued. "Vanessa has been faking violations, moving people's property at night to justify her ridiculous fines." A collective gasp filled the room. The whispers turned to outright outrage. People started pulling out their own violation notices, flipping through them with new eyes. Vanessa's face turned a shade of crimson I'd never seen before. "This is slander," she spat, rising to her feet. "I have always acted in the best interest of this community." "You stole over $50,000, Vanessa," I interrupted, "and we have proof." That's when the final nail in her coffin landed. The district attorney's office had been quietly watching the meeting, waiting for the evidence to be presented. As soon as Vanessa opened her mouth to argue again, two plainclothes investigators stepped forward. "Vanessa Cartwright," one of them said, flashing a badge, "we have some questions for you regarding financial misconduct and fraud." Her entire body stiffened. The room exploded. Some people cheered. Others looked stunned. The board members scrambled to distance themselves. As Vanessa was escorted out of the building, she turned to glare at me, eyes burning with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed. I just smiled. "Oh, Vanessa," I said. "It already is." The moment Vanessa was led out of the Maplewood Estates Community Hall, the atmosphere shifted from shock to celebration. The reign of terror was over. But for me, the real work was just beginning. With Vanessa gone, her puppet board members tried to backpedal, pretending they had no idea what she'd been doing. Some even offered half-hearted apologies, claiming they had only been following orders. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Trust was broken, and the only way to fix it was to clean house entirely. So we did. I formally called for a special election, and thanks to the 4 properties I had purchased, I had just enough voting power to dissolve the old HOA leadership and bring in people who actually cared about the community. The first order of business? reversing every single unfair fine Vanessa had imposed. Tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent fees were wiped clean. Homeowners who had been forced to pay ridiculous penalties were issued refunds. The shady contractor deals? Terminated immediately. But that wasn't enough. We needed to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. I worked with my lawyer, Sarah Donovan, to draft new HOA bylaws, ensuring that no single person could ever hold unchecked power. Major decisions required a homeowner vote, not just the president's approval. All financial records had to be made publicly available. Special protections were put in place for elderly and disabled residents. With these safeguards in place, Maplewood Estates transformed overnight. The fear was gone. No more Vanessa stalking the neighborhood at dawn with her measuring tape. No more neighbors whispering behind closed doors, too scared to speak up. Instead, the community actually came together. We started a neighborhood assistance program, funded by the money Vanessa had stolen and was now being recovered through legal action. Elderly homeowners who had once been targeted were now getting help with yard work, repairs, and maintenance. For free. And my mother? She finally got her peace back. Her garden, once labeled an eyesore, was now the pride of the neighborhood. The same people who once feared speaking out were stopping by, complimenting her roses, sharing coffee, and actually enjoying the community they lived in. A few weeks later, I saw something that made me pause. A moving truck. Vanessa, standing by the curb, watching as the last of her belongings were packed away. The final insult? Under the new bylaws, the white picket fence she had once forced other homeowners to remove was now non-compliant and had to be torn down before she left. As she drove away, I sat on the porch swing next to my mother, the wind chimes softly singing in the breeze. "You know," she said, smiling at her garden gnomes, "sometimes the best revenge is just making things right." I thought the battle ended when Vanessa's moving truck pulled away, but I couldn't have been more wrong. What started as a personal fight for justice in Maplewood Estates soon turned into something much bigger. A few days after Vanessa's downfall, I got an unexpected call from a journalist. Apparently, my fight against HOA corruption had started to gain national attention. News outlets picked up the story, and soon other communities, thousands of them, began coming forward with their own HOA horror stories. Elderly homeowners losing their homes over bogus fines. Families being forced to pay for unnecessary renovations to line the pockets of corrupt officials. Entire communities trapped under the rule of power-hungry HOA boards. It wasn't just Maplewood Estates. This was happening everywhere. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my mother anymore. Fueled by the momentum, I worked with Sarah Donovan to launch a nationwide initiative, helping homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs. We provided legal resources, media exposure, and even financial assistance for those in danger of losing their homes to fraudulent fines. And the impact? Massive. Lawsuits were filed. State lawmakers started proposing new regulations. Some of the worst offenders, HOA presidents just like Vanessa, were exposed and removed. But what shocked me the most? A message from Vanessa's former assistant. She had more names. More HOA leaders who had been running the same scam in different communities, and she was ready to blow the whistle. This wasn't over. Not even close. Fast forward to today, and we're still seeing the same patterns. HOA boards exploiting their communities, targeting the most vulnerable homeowners, and abusing power with little to no oversight. But now, people are fighting back. We've seen grassroots movements form, pushing for transparency and homeowner rights. Technology has made it easier than ever to expose corruption, with homeowners using security cameras, online records, and social media to hold bad actors accountable. And yet, many HOA horror stories remain buried, with people too afraid to speak up. If there's one thing we've learned from this story, it's that one person can make a difference. One fight can spark a movement. But we're not done yet. Vanessa may be gone, but this fight isn't over. The truth is there are thousands of people just like her, still sitting in HOA boardrooms, still abusing power, still destroying lives for profit. So here's where you come in. Should we go after the next HOA corruption case? Should we expose more HOA scams and fraudulent leaders? Comment below and tell us, should we take this fight to a national level? If you support homeowners fighting back, hit like. Subscribe for more shocking HOA stories. You won't believe what we uncover next. Because this is just the beginning.